All right, so here we go. We're at 2:20. So I want to thank all you guys for being here again. I really appreciate your attendance, and I'm sure a couple of our other members will arrive in the next few moments. But thank you guys so much. So today is the first real lecture on the course topics and material. Last meeting, of course, it was just an introductory orientation type meeting. Today we're really going to start jumping into the information and content that we need to know about in Introduction to Critical Reasoning and Writing. So as you know, you're able to interact with me through the chat interface or by using your microphones or cameras, however you want. And I'll just take those comments and questions as they come. But if there's ever anything as I'm presenting the material that you want me to repeat, expand on, or explain again, or in a different way, then just let me know and I'll be happy to help. I just want to make sure I'm getting all the information through to you as clearly as I can. Okay, so this is a class in critical thinking. The whole goal for us is to try to learn how to be good critical thinkers, or at least better critical thinkers, to make some progress on that. And so I believe for us to jump into this course, we really should start off with a clear understanding of what it is to be a good critical thinker. Like, what's the definition of that concept? So let me go ahead and try and give it to you, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. So, good critical thinker. So what is this? This is a type of person who does two things at least. They're the sort of person who would not believe a claim unless it was based on good arguments or good evidence. Okay, so a person who will not believe a claim unless it is supported by good arguments or evidence. And there's a second part to the definition too. So good critical thinker, a person who will not believe a claim unless it is supported, by, one word missing, supported by good evidence or arguments. And the second part has to do with when you're the one making the claim to some other party or audience. So a good critical thinker is not going to believe something unless the claim they're hearing can be backed up with some kind of reasonable defense in terms of argument or evidence. So critical thinkers of the world, good critical thinkers, if they hear something told to them, reported to them, etc., if information is passed on to them, they're not just going to uncritically say, oh, wow, I agree with that, and isn't that interesting? Their initial reaction is, are you sure? What's the evidence? Can you prove this? Let me see what kind of arguments you have to support that. Now, a critical thinker is willing to believe things, but only those things that can somehow be demonstrated on the basis of reasonable proof or evidence. So they're a little bit more careful about what beliefs pass through into their belief system. There's a filter there. The information will not come through into the belief system unless it can somehow be validated by reasonable evidence or arguments. I see a question in the DMs. This question is if they missed anything in the first few minutes, but no, not really. We're just getting started at this time, so you should be fine if you just arrived. Okay, so a person that would not believe a claim unless it's based on or supported by good evidence and arguments. And, on the other hand, when the good critical thinker presents a claim to other people, they, on their behalf, make sure to provide good evidence and arguments to support the claim. So, and when making claims to others, they provide good evidence or arguments to support the claim. I'm going to type this as well. I know it's a little bit cramped, sorry for that. Writing support the claim in this little corner here. Oops. I'll do better in terms of creating more space when I have a long definition like that. But you're reading it, and while you're reading it, I'm just going to quickly type it out in the chat as well so that it's in both mediums for us. So give me 2 seconds to write that out. Okay. So there you have it. Good critical thinker is a type of person that, one second here, oops. Just got to, I'm doing a dual stream thing that'll make sense later, and that means I have to copy and paste some of these notes to another window that I have open. Okay, so good critical thinker, a person that will not believe a claim unless it is supported by good evidence and good arguments. And when they're the one that's sending out information to some other audience or person, they're always able to back their claims up. They don't just boldly assert things without having the ability to prove it or to at least justify it or to defend it. So when you're a good critical thinker in this world, you wait until you have good evidence and arguments before you're going to be willing to believe something. You don't just believe things because they sound cool or interesting or because you hope that they're true. You only believe things that can be supported by good, reasonable evidence and arguments. And since that's what the good critical thinker demands and insists on when they hear information from another source, then they make sure that when they're on the delivering end of the info, that they're able to back up and defend their claims in the same way they expect others to be able to do when they're being presented with information. So we're human beings and we deal in information. Sometimes we're on the receiving end of it. You're hearing things reported to you, told to you, you're reading them in books or in articles, you're online hearing things, you're hearing things from people on social media. And sometimes you're the one that's producing or making claims to other people. But if you're a good critical thinker, there again is some standards, some intellectual standards that come to bear on what you're really willing to believe or not believe. Now, on the other hand, there are also bad critical thinkers, and I want us to understand the contrast between the two. So a bad critical thinker, the definition should be easy now that we have the other one, because it's just defined in contrast. So let me write it down here first. Bad critical thinker. So you can probably guess, this is a person who will believe claims that are not based on good evidence and good arguments. And when making claims to others, they do not provide good arguments or evidence to support their claims. Okay, there you go. Bad critical thinker. A person that would believe claims that are not based, not supported by good evidence and good arguments. And when they make claims to other people, they also lack the ability to back those claims up with reasonable evidence or support. So bad critical thinkers are very sloppy and loose with the things they believe. They'll believe things that they hear, whether there's any good reason to believe it or not. Many times just because they have some kind of desire for the claim to be true, or maybe because it suits a different psychological need that's not based in fact. Bad critical thinkers believe things for no good reason a lot of times. And then when they make claims to other people, if somebody asks them, well, why is that true? How do you know? They might just throw up their hands and be like, I don't really know. It's just how I feel, or I just have a sense. They can't really defend it. They can't provide reasonable supporting evidence. So it's a very important skill in life. It's one of the most important skills in life to be a good critical thinker, because a good critical thinker is not easily manipulated, deceived, or exploited. They're not easily taken to be the victim of a scam or some kind of con artist. They're not gullible in general. And they're usually granted intellectual respect for being able to produce good arguments to back their claims up, rather than to just boldly claim things in a way that you can't prove or you can't even defend. So you want to be, in this highly competitive world, a skilled and a wise critical thinker, because otherwise you'll be the easy target and prey of all of the highly competitive people in this world that would like to take advantage of those that don't ask questions, that don't scrutinize, that don't pay attention to evidence. And that's the skill that we're going to try to gradually build up in ever so many ways as we work our way through this semester. So to kind of make this even a little more real and concrete, I was going to ask some of us here in the meeting, can anybody give us some examples? Let's try and go first with, but by the way, I want to type in the other definition. So 1 second. Get your mind thinking about examples of good critical thinkers for the moment, but I'm going to write this definition too in the chat. So a person will believe claims that are not based or by good evidence, arguments, and in making claims to others, they do not provide good arguments or evidence to support their claims. Okay. Bad critical thinker. So there you see that definition spelled out one time in the chat to make it clear. Yeah, 1 second as I'm copying that to the other page. No, I receive a message in DMs asking if you have to turn in notes or anything. No, you do not. So don't worry about that. Okay. It's just for your benefit. I want you to know the concepts. I mean, you might have to answer questions at some point, like on a test, which says, what's a good critical thinker? Then you might have to define it, but you'll have your notes to use and you'll have your memory. But I'm not asking you to turn in the notes literally. Only on written like tests, quizzes, or anything, we have something to submit to me. Okay, so bad critical thinker, we know what that is. We see the definition of both concepts. So here now is my question. What could be some examples? Just spin your wheels and reflect. Think for a moment. Who could be people that fit the description of a good critical thinker? Now, you can say either a category of persons, like a title, profession, an office, or you can talk about a specific person if you're able to justify what you're saying. But what persons or sorts of persons could you think of which are good critical thinkers? People who don't believe things unless there's good evidence and arguments, and they're also able to back and support their views with evidence and arguments.
Could it be like a judge?
Okay, that's a great example, Blake, to get us started. Yeah, a judge. A judge in a court of law has to weigh decisions about guilt or innocence in some cases. In some cases, they have to make sentencing decisions. And they can't very well do that if they say, well, I think so-and-so is guilty of a crime, but I can't really tell you why. It's just a hunch. They can't provide a sentencing guideline and be like, yeah, but it's based on nothing. It's just based on my mood. So they have to be able to give detailed justifications and legal justifications for every decision that they make in court. That's a good example. Another one I see here from Sajad, doctors. Maybe you mean the medical doctors, not a real doctor like me, but yeah, medical doctors, those that have to provide a clinical diagnosis or a course of treatment. They have to be able to support that diagnosis or course of treatment with some kind of verifiable medical evidence. They can't just say, yeah, I think you have cancer, but I don't really know why I think that. It's just something that I think. They can't tell you to take some course of treatment without being able to provide you with reasons as to why that's the best suited for your ailment, whatever it is. So doctors, very good. You said judges. Scientists, I see in the direct messages. Yes, certainly scientists have to form theories about how cause and effect relationships work in nature, and they have to do that based on observable evidence that can be presented to the scientific community. They have to be able to give testable explanations. So you can't be a scientist if you just say, hey, here's a theory, but I have no data. I have no evidence to support it. So it's definitely built right into the field of science to be a good critical thinker. Physicists, yes, a branch of science, and that makes perfectly good sense as well. If a physicist has a new physical theory, whether it's Einstein, Newton, or anybody, they have to be able to justify these views with mathematical and empirical evidence. Journalists, very good. I mean, there can be cases and cases, though. Some journalists may be in doing sensationalist or tabloid journalism. There's also a lot of that out there, paparazzi and stuff, but good journalism, good investigative and professional journalism where there are high standards of journalistic integrity, those are great critical thinkers, because when they, let's say, write a piece where they found some kind of corporate or government scandal, they would have interviews, they would have data, they would have documents which they could use to bolster the account that they're producing in the media. Police officers, for the most part, yes, they have to make critical decisions about how to defuse a situation, how to effect an arrest, how to safely apprehend somebody. Now, of course, sometimes police officers can make misjudgments in the field, and we all have seen cases like that. So once again, to paint with a broad brush, some people might have criticisms in one case or another, but for the most part, good policing that's done in the right way, I would say, is probably a fair example. Detectives trying to solve a crime, yes, of course. You can't very well say, well, here is the guilty party, but I have no evidence for it. Same with lawyers, right? Lawyers have to, in a court of law, make a case for either guilt or innocence, and they have to convince the jurors that the evidence is sufficient to either cast a verdict for guilt or not guilt. Batman, I mean, maybe Batman, the fictional character, if you're talking about, I guess he has to solve crimes and sort of take down these big villains and stuff. I guess he makes good and reasonable judgments. He has to deploy all those tools that he has in the Batcave. I guess he's super rich, right? He's Bruce Wayne.
They also called him the best detective, which is what DC stands for, is Detective Comics.
Okay, I did not know that was the acronym. Yeah, so I think it's probably a fair example, although I'm not 100% like deep into the weeds of the Batman universe. So I would leave it to you to have further examples of his like enterprising efforts to accumulate evidence. Pilots in regard to decision making, that's a fair example as well. Even Evan, rather, maybe it's just the example of Batman that was distasteful to you. I really don't know. That's up to you to explain. But anyways, so good examples all around. What do you think could be a bad critical thinker? Sajad, young sibling who ate the last piece of pizza is a good critical thinker. I'm sorry if I'm not following the reference 100%. Is it because what could be the reason? It's just because they don't want to leave it like with something left on the plate. Maybe not the best example, sorry to say that. But how about some bad critical thinkers? Who could be individuals or types of people that believe things for no good reason and they cannot produce evidence to justify their own views if they're challenged? So flat earther, that's a good example. I mean, some of them might try to suggest evidence, like if you're just standing on the Earth's surface, it kind of looks flat, I'm not like tilted, but obviously that's a pretty weak source of evidence. In the most case, they're ignoring the wild and the wide wealth of evidence that actually establishes the correct shape of the Earth. Conspiracy theorists in general, yeah, I mean, many of them have extremely convoluted and complex, going down the rabbit hole sources of evidence that they rely on from whatever unreliable sources. But if they're going to ignore the official accounts of whatever the so-called conspiracy is about, then they're probably not being the most sensitive to reliable evidence. TV hosts, are they bad critical thinkers? I don't know. Maybe it depends on the example. I wouldn't be able to corroborate it without thinking more deeply about why. Because some TV hosts, I don't know, it's just a case-by-case basis kind of thing, isn't it? Like some of them will probably have to be good critical thinkers and some wouldn't. But maybe you're thinking like television itself is just such a, I don't know, vapid or like chasing ratings. And so it's all about the entertainment value rather than anything intelligent or something. Maybe that's what you mean. Salespeople, are they bad critical thinkers? I don't know. If they're very good at what they're doing, then they're going to make the sales pitch by trying to appeal to the person's reason. They'll say, well, you need this product or service because it fits a need that you seem to have. And here are the reasons why it's suitable to that need. So, I mean, I can imagine a good critical thinking salesperson. We're talking about bad, right? I mean, that's clear, right? I'm trying to get you guys to think of examples of bad, but maybe some salespeople are unscrupulous. Maybe some of them try to push a product on you without being able to explain why it's good. But how successful would they really be in that case? Maybe if they're just attractive or if they're charismatic, that could work. Let's see, guys trying to argue online who eventually just start making ad hominem attacks. Yeah, sure. Maybe how do I put it? Like people that get into like these flame wars on the internet, on social media, Twitter, and other things. Sometimes people have reasonable evidence to support their, moral, political, or whatever social point of view on a topic. But a lot of times, yes, it can easily devolve into just mutual accusations and name calling and insults without anybody really stopping to think about the logical or rational basis for why they think this or feel this way. Gamblers, yeah, I mean, you can have sophisticated gamblers that play card games and stuff, and they are constantly like crunching numbers in their head, trying to make the right play. But yeah, a lot of gamblers, those that get kind of addicted to it and stuff, they're not thinking critically about what the next bet is or should be, because they can have an irrational belief in their success that's not derived from evidence, but rather just feelings or something. Are criminals bad critical thinkers? Are politicians? Let me get both of those examples. Some politicians surely are good critical thinkers, but then, again, there are cases and then there are cases. Some politicians just try to win a political following by appealing to nativism or by appealing to the base instincts of a group of people, using rhetoric, using faulty logic. And so some politicians, it's fair to say, they're not the best critical thinkers. They make policy proposals based on emotion rather than on a logical analysis of what's best for the country. But I don't want to paint with too broad a brush and make us too cynical about political careers and the political world. I mean, some people go into public office just wanting to be a servant and trying to do their best to, advance the best interests of their political community or country. But yeah, I take your point, right? Some politicians are just bombastic and they don't make arguments based on reason. Criminals, there can be, I think, some skillful and enterprising criminals that, succeed in their criminal lifestyle because they're able to evade detection so carefully. But I would argue that in the biggest possible picture, they're not good critical thinkers because a criminal lifestyle is, in the end, hollow, unsatisfying, and raises all kinds of liabilities that don't benefit you. So drunk drivers, sure, that's a clear example, I would say. But it's only connected with one action. So is the drunk driver a bad critical thinker in all contexts? Maybe not. But if they make a bad decision on that occasion to drive drunk, then they weren't thinking very wisely at that time for sure. So I don't know. I've taught this material so many times. I've seen so many different types of examples. People will talk about like those that are anti-science, maybe not being good critical thinkers. Sometimes they'll refer to children, Of course, there are exceptions to that because some children are quite precocious, but children are famously also, for the most part, gullible, and they rely on the information they hear from higher sources, whether those are valid or not, because they can't make judgments of their own yet, given their immaturity in life. Sometimes people will say like a religious extremist could be a bad critical thinker because they're committed to a view that's insensitive to changing evidence. Gurus and stuff. I don't know. I don't want to disabuse anybody of the idea that there can be like valid pursuit of religion or spirituality within the realm of critical thinking. But yeah, if you're like a cult member and you just shut your mind off to like alternative viewpoints, then you can't be thinking too critically in general. Okay, so good. Just an opening discussion here as we set the boundaries for our class. We're just trying to become better critical thinkers. And so our goal is to move from like the worst examples of bad critical thinkers that we've heard and make at least some progress towards the best examples of good critical thinkers that we've been talking about here. Professors, I think, academics, probably good critical thinkers, at least internal to the field that they specialize in. Because if you're up here teaching, you can't just say, here's a historical fact, and the student asks you, well, why did that happen? You'd be like, I can't actually explain it. So a specialist in a field, academic, technical, or otherwise, is usually a pretty good critical thinker, at least within that domain. Okay, so the next thing I want us to learn is what is an argument, because we've used this word already a few times, but we've not been 100% precise yet or defined it. Good critical thinkers are those that won't believe claims unless they're backed up and supported by a good argument or good evidence. And they can make good arguments to defend their claims when they make them to others. So argument, 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 this word keeps popping up. Arguments are key because these are what good critical thinkers can skillfully evaluate to see whether the argument is good or bad. And they're also able to present arguments and produce them when they are the ones making claims. So this requires us to take a real deep look then into what is an argument in the technical sense used by logic and critical thinking. So let's learn an argument. Now, one thing I want to just make sure that we set to one side right away is that there's an everyday use of the word argument, like a kind of common, colloquial, informal use of the word, which is not the same as its use and meaning in a technical world of logic and critical thinking. So when you've heard the word argument, some of you have had this association, like a negative connotation, that an argument is when two people are fighting, when they are being mean to each other, insulting each other, and being nasty or getting tense. Like someone might be thinking argument. I'm thinking of my parents getting into an argument and then getting divorced or something, or a couple getting into an argument or whatever. But that's not what argument means when it's used in a critical thinking context. In our logic and critical thinking world, arguments are good things. All they are attempts to defend some claim with evidence or reasons. And to be even more precise, to put a finer point on it, here is the formal definition of an argument, and then we'll work on it. So an argument is a set of two or more sentences where one of the sentences is the conclusion of the argument, and all the others, except for that one, are called premises. Okay, argument. It is a set of two or more sentences where one of the sentences is the conclusion and all of the other ones are premises. Okay, now, let me give you an example of an argument. I'll go to the other side of the board and write it there. Okay. Jones' fingerprint is on the murder weapon. I don't want to make it that way. Sorry. Jones' fingerprint is on the murder weapon. Jones' footprint is at the scene of the crime. Okay, so therefore, and here we'll have the conclusion. Let's just say the conclusion of the argument is that Jones is the culprit, or is the killer, let's just say. Okay. Now, just as an example, it's just an example to get us to see how the arguments like play out and how they look visually. This argument is a set of two or more sentences. In total, there's three, okay? And we have one conclusion. Now, the conclusion of the argument, when it's written in what's called standard form, which this is, the conclusion is always placed at the bottom, below, okay? And then the premises are listed above. Now, let me go ahead and tell you a little bit more about these words, premises and conclusion. But first, I want to type that definition into the chat so it's there. Argument. So two or more sentences where one of the sentences is the conclusion and all the other ones are the premises. Now, let me tell you more about what those words conclusion and premise mean. So the conclusion of the argument, the bottom line, the thing at the bottom, that is the sentence or the statement that you are trying to prove to be true. Okay? So just see the definition there of conclusion. And premises, they are their role. They are the pieces of evidence that is supposed to give support for the conclusion. So the evidence or reasons support the conclusion. Okay. So there you go. In this argument, what's the conclusion again? Let me just hear it from you. We're trying to prove what statement? That's a question for you. You got to answer that.
Jones is the killer.
Yeah, the Jones is the killer. Correct. This is the conclusion of the argument. We're trying to prove this. Now, what are the evidence statements? Well, these are the two premises that are supposed to leave us with some evidence that this is true. So Jones' fingerprint is on the murder weapon. Jones' footprint is at the scene of the crime. So therefore, Jones is the killer. In this case, we have a couple of pieces of evidence that stand behind and support that back up the conclusion. So they give us a reason or a couple reasons to think that it's true. Let's see. So just as another example, I'm just kind of playing around with like random possibilities. Oh, not to worry, I see a student's just arrived. Not to worry, thank you for being here. You'll catch up on it, and I'm going to post the recorded lecture later. So anything you've missed, you'll be able to take notes on it later. Okay, and not to worry about everyone talking at the same time. It'll happen at times, of course. So anyway, Bob's phone has romantic text to an unknown person. Therefore, Bob is cheating on his girlfriend. Like, this is a conclusion, but the person doesn't just say, you know, you're cheating on me. That wouldn't be an argument. An argument requires at least one premise. So there's no such thing as an argument which is one sentence by itself. Even if the sentence is true, there has to be at least one premise provided as support for it. So let me ask this question. If I tell you that the United States is the greatest country in the world, is that an argument?
No.
No, it's not. Why not? What's wrong?
You don't have a premises?
Good. No premises were given. Now, could I make an argument towards that conclusion? Yes. But then I would just have to give some reasons why I think the conclusion is true. So maybe this could be the argument. The United States has the world's most powerful military. The United States has the world's most long-standing constitutional democracy. Therefore, the United States is the world's greatest country. But in this case, I've made an argument. I tried to supply some reasons for the conclusion. So even if you agree with what someone has said, they have not made an argument unless they've attempted to give some kind of evidential support, even if it's just one piece of evidence that supports that claim. Okay. So I hope that's making some decent sense to you so far. When we make arguments, we provide at least one premise, but there could be more. There could be 1, 2, 3, or however many, but however many premises are given, they imply a conclusion statement. And the conclusion is the thing that you're trying to make the case for, that you're trying to prove to be true. The premises are the evidence that you give to stand it up. Now, the arguments that we have are written in what is called standard form. I know I mentioned it just a moment ago, but let me kind of expand on that a little bit. So like Joe is taller than Mike. Mike is taller than Sarah. So what would follow from those two things, if anyone can tell me? Joe's taller than Mike. Mike's taller than Sarah, so therefore...
Joe is tall.
No, because they could all be babies, and one is like 2 feet tall, and one is 1, and one is like, you know... So no, it doesn't follow.
Joe is taller than Sarah?
Yes, correct. That's right. Okay. Joe is taller than Sarah. That's the conclusion. These are two premises, just as an example. And notice how they're written down and how they look on the page, because that's something I want us to emphasize and to know. This is called standard form. So in the standard form way of writing down an argument, you have to do it as follows. The conclusion is always at the bottom. And then the premises are listed above as though in a vertical listing. So the important thing is that when one premise sentence is done, you have to jump down to the next available ledger line. You can't just continue it on the same continuous line. Otherwise, it's not in standard form. So like, as an example here, if the argument was written like this, Okay, so look at the difference between the two examples that we have. It's the same sentences, yes, but only one is written in the proper logical form. This is not in standard form, because notice that all the sentences are just jumbled together. Like when one sentence ends, we're not hitting like the equivalent of the return key to jump down to the next available line, but it just is continuing on the same, and that's wrong. So this is how it's supposed to look. If it helps you, I would argue you should number the premises, because that kind of requires you to put them in like a point-by-point list. So although this is the same content here, it's not written in standard form. So just keep yourself in the habit of doing that. When we write arguments in logic, and on assignments that you guys will do, homework, quizzes, and stuff, you'll be putting them in this format. The conclusion is below, so you always can see what's being argued for, and then you have the premises listed above. A horizontal line is often used to divide and separate the set of premises from the conclusion that is below. Okay, so that's how standard form looks. And it's just something that sometimes students will make errors with. You know, you get kind of like in the casual habit of just writing the sentence out like you're writing a paragraph. But in logic, we have this kind of formal requirement. It's sort of like this, guys. I don't know if you remember way back in the day when you're doing like elementary arithmetic, but sometimes you see math problems that have like this structure: 1 + 1 = 2. Okay, so like this is the result that is generated by the mathematical operations listed above. And in the same sort of way, in logic, we have a conclusion, which is sort of like a consequence that results from the information above. So instead of dealing with numbers, we're dealing with information, but this is still something that's like a product that results from these factors listed above. So it sort of almost looks like a mathematical problem in arithmetic, the standard form of a logical argument. Okay. So I'm going to clear the board from that stuff. And then a little bit more terminology for us to learn for today, at least for today's first meeting. Everything's clear so far? Everything's making sense? If not, you know, if anything you want me to repeat or go back to, we'll be happy to do that. But as long as we're all together and on the same page, then good. Let me continue from here. So what did we say just now? We say the whole point of making these arguments is to try and show or prove that the conclusion is what? Question. We're trying to make the case that what about the conclusion? What's the word? Trying to prove or show that it is blank.
True.
True, exactly, yes. Now we have to think for a second, everybody, about what the word truth means. That's an interesting and a fascinating word. It's very deep. We use it all the time, but until you take a philosophy class like this, you'll realize that you haven't really been operating with a definite understanding of its meaning, but now we'll make it clear. So what does it mean for a proposition, a sentence to be true? What is truth? Let's ask the question and think about it before I just hit you with the written answer. What do you think it means for a sentence to be true as opposed to false? What is the definition or explanation for the concept of truth? What does it mean when a sentence is true?
It's a fact.
Yes, that's very good, Michael. It is a fact. That's the right kind of answer. Let me get back to you because I see Thomas said it can be proven. Now, I actually have to say I understand why you would give that answer, but it's not actually the right one. But you're in good company, because every time I ask this question, that's usually one of the first responses that comes back. A student will say, true, it means that it can be proven. Well, not necessarily. Let me explain why. There could be things that are true that nobody can prove, or that there is no proof available for, all right? Like, I'll give you a weird example, but just try to follow my lead here. You guys know like true crime. Okay, so take like a true crime type scenario. Say there was a murderer, they killed a person, sadly, but then afterwards they disposed of the body. And they did so in a way that was so careful that no one can ever find the remains. So like imagine that they literally like melted them down, burned them to ash, and then scattered the ash to the oceans, and there's just nothing left. So there's just no trace. Okay, now the family members and friends of the victim, they have no idea what happened to them. They're like, did they get lost somewhere in the woods? Did they commit suicide? Did they get murdered? Who knows? But in my hypothetical, what's the truth about what happened to the person? Just simply say it, that in the example, the true thing that happened to them is that they what?
Were murdered.
They were murdered, right. Now, in this example, is there any proof they were murdered? Well, there's none that exists because it's been disposed of. There's no evidence around, but yet it's still true. And so, Tom, when something's true, it can often be proven, but not always. Sometimes there won't be proof, even if it's true. Here's another example. Could there be aliens somewhere in the universe outside the planet Earth right now? Could that be true? Could be. I mean, look at us. Here we are. And I guess we're aliens on the planet Earth in a sense. So it's not impossible, I would say. But do I have proof? Am I telling you there's proof and we've got all the proof? No. If there's on a distant galaxy far away from ours, some life forms, or even just like moss growing on the side of a moon rock somewhere out there, that's life. But I can't prove it. So sometimes the things that are true, we don't have the proof for, at least not yet. And so that's why I would actually side more with the definition offered here by Michael, which is that when something is true, it just means that whatever the sentence says matches the facts of reality. That's right, Taraj. Truth is just reality. It's what the facts are. Truth is just facts. So let me put the definition here and we'll make it clear. Truth. That is when what a sentence says matches the facts of reality. Okay, so when whatever the sentence says matches those facts, then that's a true sentence. Otherwise, false. So this is the dominant definition or explanation of truth in philosophy in the West. And so it's called sometimes the correspondence theory of truth. Correspondence between whatever the content of the sentence is and then the actual facts of the world. So, like, let's just test this out. I'm saying this. I'm wearing glasses. Is that true? Dr. Vulich is wearing glasses. There they are. You can see that's a fact. If I tell you I'm wearing a hat, is this true or false? It's just false. And that is because, although I'm saying it, that's not real. That's not a fact. It's not there. So people can say or write anything. But the statement is only true if it lines up and mirrors with the facts. Okay, so if I told you I was 100 years old, that's simply just not true. That's just not the fact about the time and place I was born. If I told you I was born in the 80s, unfortunately, that is true. So, you know, that is a statement of fact. That's the real case about, if you looked on my birth certificate, what decade I was born in. So statements can match the world, in which case they are true statements. And then statements can not match the world, and then they would be false. If I told you there's a cat on my table, well, not right now, there isn't. If Peachy pops up here, then I guess that statement would match with what's going on. So the goal of life is to have beliefs that are true, but we next have to talk about the next concept, and that is belief. Okay, so we're building these step by step. The next definition relies on the prior definition. So let's understand what a belief is. But before, I don't want to move on too quick. Can somebody tell me, give me an example of some sentence that's true? There's infinite many to choose from, so just pick your favorite truth, a fact, something that's a truth. Just write something down that matches the world, or say it.
The world is a very dangerous place.
Is it really dangerous? Well, it could be, I guess. You know, anything can happen to a person, but that's I argue to you, Michael, that it's a little of a controversial example because it depends, I would think, on the place and time where a person is at. The world was a lot more dangerous perhaps 1,000 years ago when we didn't have all these modern tools to help ourselves survive and to thrive. Surely today, even in a great wealthy country like ours, anything can happen. Violence could break out, some kind of, you know, attack can happen or whatever. But I would think that for some people anyway, living in safe communities, it's not so dangerous. So you give a sentence that is arguably true, but there's still room for debate about the context in which it is true. So I believe there are even clearer examples, possibly. Karen, you say the sky is blue. It's blue right now, but in the middle of the night, it's gonna be black. So it's not always blue. But yeah, fair enough. I know what you mean. Like in normal daylight viewing conditions, the human eye appears to see the color blue in the sky. Jacob, you say I went to the store and bought tomatoes. Fair enough, but I can't really verify that your statement is true. I guess I take your word for it. But we can't all know that it's true. So I was hoping to give like examples of statements that are just known by all. Biden is the president. Yes, he certainly is the president, you know, confirmed by the Electoral College and in the Congressional Convention on January the 6th. So he is the president of the United States. That's a fact. You can't have two presidents at once. We all have a brain. Sure, Noah. When you say we, though, who do you refer to? Because there actually are certain possible birth defects, like a Zika virus, where encephalitic infant is born with no brain, and that's like a significant birth defect. You can't survive it, but it has happened. Nonetheless, I'm just being picky to let you know that when you say a sentence, it really does have to refer to truth in fact, in all strictness. Global warming is real. Surely it is. I mean, that's a scientific consensus. There are some skeptics out there, just like there are skeptics about the efficacy of vaccines and other things. But I'm a person that goes with the scientific consensus, and I think the evidence is compelling. But yet again, it's one belief it's one statement that widely considered true, but there is some minority community of skeptics. There are other things about which you guys could make examples that are just totally impossible to deny, like we're the third planet from the sun. An apple is a fruit. Fair enough. You're wearing a flannel. Okay. I assume that's true. We rotate around the sun, not the other way around. Let's say Jupiter is larger than Earth. Shaquille O'Neal is taller than Kevin Hart. There's just lots of statements that are true. They're facts. Gravity is real. Sure. Fire is hot. Those all make sense. How about a fact from history? Let's get that. Biden is a president that's very recent. I'm thinking maybe a little bit further in the past. Something that's a fact about our world from the past. Pyramids were built over 2,000 years ago. True, yeah. George Washington was the first president. Civil War was fought in the 19th century in the United States. So there's a lot of facts. There's just a lot of facts. Good. So you've got that example there. There was a bear that served in the Polish army in World War II. Is that really true, Carly? I mean, you say so, but this is totally obscure to me. The date of Napoleon's death.
It's true. His name is Voltek. It's spelled with a W.
Okay.
And he has a parade every year.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Wow. Okay. Learning something every day, even when you're, up in age like me. So I appreciate it. I'm going to look that up after class too. Only 2 native mammals in Hawaii. Interesting. I don't exactly know which they are. In Iceland, there's like barely any animals at all. There's like the Arctic fox, the Icelandic horse, and there's like not much out. There's also, I guess, some minks that are out in the wild in that country. Bats and seals, interesting, in Hawaii. Okay, well, anyway, guys, Holocaust was led by Hitler. Yes, the Holocaust happened in World War II. So all kinds of examples of truths. Okay, just wanted to kind of work that over and make sure that we're on the same page thinking about it. Next up, belief. So what do you think it means for a certain individual to believe a sentence? If they believe the sentence, then what about that? What does that mean? If you believe the statement, then you, what?
It's true.
What'd you say? I thought I heard it.
You think it's true?
Yes, perfect, exactly. You think it's true. If you believe a statement or a sentence, that means that you think of it as true. You agree that it's true. Okay, belief. It is when a person thinks that a sentence is true. Okay, so belief. There's an interesting and important difference between what is a belief and what is truth. Because truth is objective, but beliefs are subjective to the individual. And a belief in some situations can be a false one. So like suppose that someone is convinced that their partner's cheating on them, but they're just being paranoid and they're not really cheating on them. In that case, the person would think it's true, the statement that they're cheating, but that's not actually happening. It's not real. It's not a fact. So a belief can be false, but truth is just literally matching the facts when the sentence matches the facts. So 2 people also can disagree about whether one statement is true. And in that case, one of them would believe it and the other one wouldn't. Let's think of the example of a flat earther talking to one of us that believes the earth is round. Take the sentence that the earth is round, and you would say, I think that is true. I believe that. This other person, the flat earther, would say, no, that's not real. That's not what's really true. I don't believe that's true. So these 2 people disagree. They don't share belief on whether the earth is round. But notice, the earth cannot have both shapes. There's only one shape that the objective object has. And so when the 2 people don't agree on it, they cannot both be correct. Another example, God, the belief in God, the statement that God exists. Most people believe this, theists. And if a person doesn't believe in it, that's an atheist. They say the statement that God exists, I don't think there's any such thing and I don't think it's real. Now, they can't both be correct, though, can they? It can't both be that God exists, but also doesn't. So at most, one of them is right. Now, with beliefs, because we can disagree on them and we can have different ones. Oh, Carl, you say there are other animals native to Hawaii, like the goose. However, the bat and seal you're talking about is the only native found in Hawaii. Well, the student's claim was mammals, though. So the goose doesn't qualify. But anyway, yeah, like just going back to the previous piece of conversation. I spoke about how in Iceland there's only a few animals in general, but in Hawaii the student's statement was about mammal forms of life. Lucas, can a belief also be defined as something that can be argued, unlike a factual truth, which cannot? Well, people can argue against factual truths too. I mean, like that the planet Earth is round. I mean, look at all the satellite photos that we have of the planet Earth. People have literally gone to space and just looked at it from outside and be like, yep, there it is, it's round. So people that don't believe that, I mean, they're going against overwhelming evidence to the contrary. So, I mean, a person can almost believe anything. Like, I don't know, is there someone out there that thinks 1 + 1 is 2 is not true? Like, they don't believe that? Maybe that's a possibility. It's hard to think of any single claim that at least some weird person couldn't doubt or deny. But for the most part, we come to consensus as rational human beings. Although we do disagree on many things, for the most part as humans, we come to consensus. Otherwise, we would have a very hard time being organized as a species. Like if I think that, the Earth's going to end tomorrow and the other guy doesn't, and none of us can agree on that, we would never be able to function. So, of course, for the most part, we agree, but there's always cases where there's some that don't. And then there are some people who have mental illnesses and even worse problems that can't seem to gain a clear picture of reality at all. So, yeah, belief. When a person thinks that a sentence is true, and all I was doing was giving you examples of statements that some people could believe in, that some could disagree about. I don't know, go back to the prior example of someone maybe thinking that their partner's cheating. So it's like this one person's talking to their friend and they say, do you think they're cheating? And the person in the relationship's like, yeah, I think so. And the friend is like, but I don't think so. So they don't agree on that statement. They don't have the same belief. One thinks it's a fact, the other doesn't. Now, what's the goal? The goal of our lives as human beings and critical thinkers is to have as many of true beliefs as we can. Because if you have a head full of false beliefs, then by definition of truth and belief, that means that you're living kind of disconnected from reality because you think that things are happening, but they're really not. And so we want to be, as critical thinkers, to the best of our ability, those that have a correct and accurate perception of reality. Now, none of us are like omniscient gods, meaning like all-knowing. So we're always bound to make some errors in judgment and to make some errors in perception too. So it's not like we'll ever get to 100% perfect accuracy. Every belief in your head is completely true. But what we can do is to be better than worse and to just do our best. And the best we can do to have true beliefs is to form beliefs based on solid justification. So justification is having good evidence or grounds for what you believe. And again, the best way to try and have a lot of true beliefs, more than not, is to follow arguments with good evidence to their logical conclusions. If you base your beliefs on good evidence and good arguments, then you're likelier to turn out to have more than less true beliefs. People who ignore evidence or don't know how to evaluate it are sometimes going to end up with more false beliefs than they ought to have. So we're going to try to be good critical thinkers who weigh evidence and arguments carefully, follow them to the right conclusions, and for the most part, with some occasional exceptions, come up with true beliefs. Okay, now, there are different types of sentences too, and I want us to all know what those are. So one type of sentence, and the main one for logic and critical thinking, is what's called an asymptotic sentence. So let's just label this heading 4 types of sentences. We're going to learn how sentences are classified sometimes in logic and grammar. So one main type of sentence is the asymptotic type. It's also sometimes labeled as declarative sentence. So I'm just going to put that as a second AKA title here in parentheses. An asymptotic, or if you want declarative sentence, is a sentence that is either true or false. That's all. So a sentence that is either true or false. Either true or false. That's an asymptotic sentence. or a declarative sentence, sometimes just called an assertion. We say in logic, we employ the terminology that an assertion has a truth value. There are two truth values. There's truth and falsehood. And if a sentence has at least one of those two values, well, exactly one of those two values, then it's an asymptotic sentence. So here, let me give you some examples. Sacramento is the capital of California. That's a true sentence, and so it's an asymptotic sentence. If I tell you Los Angeles is the capital of California, that's a false sentence, but it still has a truth value. It just has the false one, and so it still counts as an assertion. Notice those are assertions. I'm asserting something. I'm saying that something is a fact. And an assertion can either be a fact or it cannot be. But either way, it still is an assertion. So if I told you that the Titanic was the best movie ever made, that's an assertion. It may be true or false. I don't know if there's any way of evaluating the truth value of aesthetic claims like those. But nonetheless, I could claim that. And it still has the form of an asymptotic sentence. If I tell you Canada's to our north, this is an assertion and it's true. If I tell you that Mexico is to our north, this is an assertion and it's false. Okay, now, the asymptotic sentences are key because those are the only sentences that are used as premises and conclusions in logical arguments. So the type of sentences that fill those slots of like premise, premise, conclusion, they're always assertions. So this is paramount, and that type of sentence is fundamental to understanding how arguments work and how logic works. But it's not the only type of sentence that exists. So let me give you another few. Another type of sentence is what is called an interrogative. And an interrogative sentence, this is easy to define and to explain, so that's nice. It's just anything that's a question. So these are questions. So any sentence that ends with a question mark is an interrogative. Here's some random examples. Where is the bathroom? What is your favorite color? What day is it? Do you have any siblings? What is the meaning of life? You know, so from the biggest to the smallest, they're all just random, different, assorted questions. And those are different from assertions, obviously, because they don't have a truth value. They're requesting information, but they're not making any claim. So if I say to someone, where's the bathroom? They can't be like false because I didn't assert anything. You know, nor can they say true. That would just be an incorrect format of answer. They can tell me where it is or they can decline to do that, but they can't say that I've made a claim and it's either true or false. So notice these interrogatives, they do not appear as premises or conclusions in an argument. No argument ends with a question, nor does it have a question as a part of the evidence. It's always assertions. It's always claims, okay? So just to make sure it's clear, it should be so easy, but go ahead and hit me with a few quick interrogatives. Throw out some of the greatest hits, anything you can think of. Where are the watermelons? Okay, that's kind of funny, sure. It's a question you could ask, I guess, at the grocery store or maybe to your friend if you don't need to know what compartment it is in the fridge. Totally random, but I like that. What else? Something else. Why do people go to church? I wonder. How long does Saturn take to orbit the sun? Interesting, I'm not sure. Will the pandemic ever be over? I hope so. If you're vaccinated, boosted, it's not so bad, I guess, now. What is your cat's name? Peachy or Eddie, you know, but yes, good. So clear enough, everybody, right? Those are all interrogatives. Think of the term or word interrogate. That's kind of part of the root meaning of the word. To interrogate is obviously to ask questions, whatever the context may be. But in everyday life, we sometimes have to get around by asking questions. And so that's an important function of language. It's a part of speech, but it's not necessarily itself an assertion that could be used in a premise or conclusion of an argument. I have a question in direct message. Do you like San Francisco? That would be another fair example, yes. Here's a question. Is this sentence an interrogative? Yes, it is. Yes, it's just kind of a little tricky one, but that's a very meta example because the sentence is an interrogative and it's asking whether it is, but it's a question, okay? Good. So let me go ahead. There's two more types I want us to know. Next one is called imperatives or an imperative. Imperative sentences are also easy to explain. they're just commands. Commands. So if I say to somebody, take out the trash, sit down, open the door, run, leave me alone, go away, put your hands behind your head, get on the ground, whatever it is, they're all commands. Those are directives that you give to people. And that's another essential point of life and language. Sometimes we need to be able to organize events and affairs by instructing or directing people what to do. Can you think of any imperatives on your side over there? Let me hear a few if you can. Again, it's a command. It's commanding a thing or to happen or a person to do something. So it could,
Shut up.
Sorry, what? Like the word shut up?
Shut up.
Yeah, sure, that's fine. No,
This is an example.
No, it's good, right? So if you're telling someone to shut up, you're commanding them to be quiet, or even if you said literally, be quiet, stop talking, that would be a command, sure. What else?
Open your notebook.
Open your notebook, yes. Open your notebook, write this down. Take out the trash, good, we've got that one. A lot of them come from your experiences, probably with parents and authority figures. Close the door, yes. Any other favorites? Oh, good, Jacob. I was wondering if I was going to do that myself, but you've already come forward with the meta example. Give me an example of an imperative. That's an imperative because it's a command to do it. So when I say give an imperative, I'm commanding you. Okay, good, guys. So notice that these imperatives also, they don't have truth values like assertions do. I can't say to somebody, open the window, and they're like, false, because it's not an assertion. It's a directive given. Okay, now, one last possible type. People refer to exclamations. And these are just, they're kind of weird, but they're momentary expressions of feeling that we have in our language. So the exclamations, they often have like an exclamation point at the end, and in many cases, they don't even obey the proper subject-predicate grammatical structure of a complete English sentence. So many cases, they're just a word or a few words, and all they do is they reveal the inner psychological state of the speaker at the time. So like say I'm watching a sporting match and I'm like, boo, that expresses some kind of dissatisfaction or displeasure at what I'm seeing on the field. Or if I'm watching that same game and I'm like, yeah, yay, yay, or like rah, 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 like that could be a positive expression of my excitement or happiness at the events playing out in the game. Or suppose something takes me by surprise and I'm like, whoa, that expresses that in that moment I'm startled or taken aback. Yeah, like something's gross to the person. So those are the sort of examples that we would have with exclamations. They're used in language. We sometimes need them to indicate how we feel or what our inner psychological state is. But again, those are not needed in logic really, because in logic we just deal with assertions that are the building blocks of arguments. Okay, so good. Wow, could be like another one or something. All right. I think maybe like oh my god, OMG type stuff could possibly be another case. WTF, stuff like that. Those are kind of exclamations. All right. So then I want to mention a couple of last things with the time that we still have. In logic, there are what are called conclusion and premise indicator words. So we're going to learn about the conclusion indicator words first. Okay, so let me put another argument over here on the board. I hear a direct message question. Are we turning this in? No, you are not. You're not turning this in. I'll be assigning you a homework assignment next week, but it's not yet there. So just hang in and you'll be okay on that. Nothing is due, and there's nothing that's been assigned to you yet. But the first due date, you'll see it in the calendar. Let me just pull it up really fast. Yeah, so assignment 1 is going to be due on February 17th. That's 2 weeks from today. So I'm probably going to assign it to you guys next Thursday after we finish the Thursday meeting, and you have a week to complete it. That's pretty much the timeline we're looking at. So not to worry, but good question. Thank you. Okay, so California is in the United States. I am in California. So what would be the conclusion of that one? Wait for it. I'm sure you know, but just let me hear it or see it.
You are in the United States.
Yes, California is in the U.S. and I am in California, so therefore I'm in the U.S. Okay, now, conclusion indicator words are words that you would say or write right before you state the conclusion of the argument. Okay, now some of these words, they're already lurking around in your vocabulary, and so you're right on top of it, Carly and Lucas. Therefore, that's one of the big ones. It's probably the most well-known and well-established. Therefore. You've also got ergo. Okay, Carly going for the old Latin stuff, old-fashioned. To many of our students, that might be a bit obscure, but ergo is another conclusion indicator word. It originally is from Latin. And so you could say that California is in the United States. I'm in California, ergo, I'm in the United States. But it's not just therefore and ergo. So, you don't need to use the word and, actually, Noah, just so by itself is fine. So, that's another very common conversational one that we hear all the time. California's in the US, I'm in California, so I am in the US. So is another one. The 3 dots, Lucas. Oh, you guys have got some background knowledge. That's something I wasn't expecting any student to mention, but yeah, sometimes a symbol of 3 dots is used, but it's not a word, so it's a little outside of what I was mentioning. But yeah, in notation, you'll sometimes see this, and that means the conclusion follows the triangle of dots. Thus, that's a good one, Sajad. Yes, thus is another one. Let me change the example. So like Jones' fingerprint is on the murder weapon, and Jones' footprint is at the crime scene. Thus, Jones is the killer. Or hence, Jones is the killer. Another good one. So he's a killer. Therefore, he's a killer. Ergo, he's the killer. So therefore, so, thus, hence, ergo. Is there anything else you can dredge up from the back of your mind that has the same role in language as those words? Finally, only thing I want to say about that, Michael, I can't add it actually, because finally sometimes just means this is the last thing, not necessarily the logically implied thing. So if I told you, like, I got up this morning, I had breakfast, then I had lunch, and finally I had dinner, that doesn't necessarily mean that I've got to a conclusion, like those are evidence for the conclusion. So it can just be about temporal events or the sequence of events. So that's why I can't add finally. Karen, no, even though implies a contrast. So that would totally not be okay. Like if I said, California's in the US, I'm in California, even though I'm in the US, that's weird because it would make it seem like these things don't imply this. No, no. In conclusion, that's fine. Yeah, we could have in conclusion. There's also consequently. You ever heard that one? So California's in the US, I'm in California. Consequently, I'm in the US. No, not in fact, because in fact does not express a relationship of inference from evidence to a conclusion. You could say in fact before the first premise. In fact, California's in the US. In fact, I'm in California. That's not necessarily in specific reference to now we're jumping over that line to infer the conclusion. Okay, so these are like inference words. They mean based on the prior information, this follows. You could also just say it follows that. So let's kind of summarize some of the main options here. Therefore, thus, so, hence, consequently, it follows that. In conclusion, ergo. If you really want to get into the old Latin stuff, there's also QED. Nobody really uses it much outside of philosophy, but I think in Latin it stands for like quod est demonstratum, which means so it is demonstrated. But in most all everyday life, we don't use that one too much. It's very formal. Okay, so it's nice to know what conclusion indicator words are, because then when you go back into your everyday lives and you hear people say those words, it should trigger your awareness that now they're saying the conclusion of some logical argument that they're either explicitly or tacitly presenting to you. So someone's like, well, this new guy got hired and he does my job so much better than me, so I think they're going to fire me. You know, that's an argument. Even though it's just a casual statement, it's an argument because the person's conclusion is that they'll get fired, and then they gave these reasons before. So, like, you might have said therefore or hence or thus. Some of them are a little more academic and formal sounding, but they all have the same logical role in language. So we'll know then to be able to recognize those in speech and in writing. Okay, now there's also premise indicator words, and that we have to also add to our knowledge. So premise indicator words. Premise indicator words are words that you would say not before the conclusion, but before the various premises of the argument. So they're like evidence words. What they indicate is that this statement is a piece of evidence that's going to build towards or lead to a conclusion. So maybe you've got some of those, like so like I'll go back while you're thinking of that. Let me change the example back to the thing about the murderer, because I think it's easy to just use. Therefore, Jones is the killer. So the argument I wrote, it's one that you might hear in a court of law or like forensic evidence being presented in a criminal case, but it says Jones' fingerprint is on the murder weapon. Jones' DNA was found under the victim's fingernails. Therefore, Jones is the killer. Now, what might be some words said prior to the assertion of those premises? Let me see if anybody can guess or just judge. Okay, because. That's very good, exactly. Because is the most well-known of the premise indicator words, so I'm glad that you got that. So let me read it by using those words. Because Jones' fingerprint is on the murder weapon, and because Jones' DNA was found under the victim's fingernails, it follows that Jones is the killer. Okay? Not just the words first and second. I'm not sure if I'm misunderstanding you, Hannah, but you couldn't just say first is fingerprints on the murder weapon, second, because that just might mean I'm listing a number of facts, not necessarily evidence for something. Because is a big one. Since, there you go, Jordan, that's another major one. So since Jones' fingerprint is on the murder weapon, and since Jones's DNA was found on the victim's fingernails, consequently Jones is the killer. Okay. Proving, no. Proving would be perhaps what you would say before the conclusion. These are evidence that give a reason to believe this. But the evidence is not what is being proven, it's what proves. So not necessarily. Coy, according to? Not really, because according to could just be like someone reports the information, and so according to them, such and such is the case. Seeing that, okay, that's kind of good. I would put it like insofar as, or on account of, due to the fact that. Supposing, that's fine, Jacob. Supposing, well, supposing makes it sound more hypothetical though. Like you're not actually saying this is true. Because or since establishes it as a given, and then that's the conclusion. No, Blake, not here we see. No. Moreover, also no, because moreover just means here's something additional. It doesn't mean this is evidence. Because and since, that's fine. How about given that? There's another one. Given that Jones' fingerprint is on the murder weapon, and given that Jones' DNA was found under the victim's fingernails, therefore he's the killer. Yeah, due to the fact that, given that. Insofar as, inasmuch as, these are perhaps less common, perhaps more formal sounding, but they're also premise indicator words. In the old days, I've heard some old English writing where just the simple word for was used as a premise indicator word, but it's kind of like tricky to parse that out. often in that situation, the person would verbally say the conclusion first, and then they would say the word for before they start enumerating the premises. Like, Jones is the killer, for his fingerprint was found on the murder weapon, and since his DNA was found in the victim's fingernails. But since those are a little bit harder to parse and to give examples for, I would suggest that you just stay closer to these core examples due to the fact that, given that, on account of, and those kind of examples, right? So now we have become familiar with another concept, premise indicator words. Okay, now, so just one last thing before I let us go for today's Thursday meeting. Let's know this, that there's a difference between a set of sentences that amounts to an argument and a set of sentences that are just a description of facts, but none of them are premises or conclusions. Like, as an example, let me tell you this. Dr. Vulich was born in the 80s. Dr. Vulich is wearing glasses. Dr. Vulich has 2 cats. Is that an argument? No, it's not good. It's not an argument. Why not, though? I mean, it's 3 sentences. They are all true. So why isn't it an argument? What's the wrong thing about it?
You're just stating facts.
Right. There's no reasoning. There's no inference. So none of those facts are evidence for any of the others. It's not like Dr. Vulich was born in the 80s. Dr. Vulich has glasses, therefore he has 2 cats. It's not like that is the logical product of those other 2 facts. So it's not an argument. It's just a set of info, all of which is true, but none of them are leading to anything else. None of them are the basis for claiming the other things. So if I just told you, like, the items that are in my bag, like, I have a pencil in my bag, I have a textbook, and I have a pair of headphones, that's not an argument. It's 3 things that could all be true, but none of them is something that implies the others. So for there to be an actual argument, you really have to key in on, is there some type of inference that is made? Is there some kind of conclusion that is stated based on premises? And so that's when it really would be helpful for you to try and look around for, like, a conclusion indicator word, or at least a reasonable corollary for that. So, like, if a person says therefore, thus, hence, so, you know that they're drawing a conclusion from some previously stated information. But if there's no attempt to build a bridge from premises to conclusion, then we may have a set of sentences, they may even be true, but they don't provide reasoning towards a conclusion. All right. So let me then just say a few pieces of summary, and then we'll continue with this next Tuesday. Today, what we've learned is, what is a good critical thinker? It's a person that would not believe claims unless they could be based on good evidence or arguments, and also the kind of person that will provide good evidence and arguments to support the claims they make when they make them to others. Bad critical thinkers of the world are those that believe things for no very good reason. They believe things that cannot be and that are not supported by good evidence and arguments. And when they make claims to others, they often lack the ability to provide any kind of substantial, reasonable support for their views. Now, arguments are key because that's what good critical thinkers are good at evaluating and also generating. And an argument, in the formal sense, is a set of 2 or more sentences where there's one conclusion and at least one premise. The conclusion of the argument is a statement that you're trying to prove to be true, and the premises of the argument are the evidence that supports the conclusion or backs it up, or that leads to it. When you write an argument in logic, you should write it in standard form. That means the conclusion is given at the bottom, and there's a set of premises listed above, separated from each other, that then lead to the conclusion. And there's sometimes a horizontal line that divides the 2 parts of the argument, premises from conclusion. The point of the argument is to convince that the conclusion is true. When a sentence is true, that means whatever it says matches the facts of reality, and it's false otherwise. When we believe that something is true, that means that we think that the statement mirrors reality. So a belief is when a person thinks that a sentence is true. And of course, a person can have a false belief, but truth is objective and it just is what it is. So I guess then we just talked about how there are different types of sentences. There are assertions, there are interrogatives, imperatives, and exclamations. We talked about them and gave examples. of primary importance were the assertions, because those have a truth value. They're either true or false. But of course, in life, we have to operate and utilize all the linguistic tools we have. So we sometimes ask questions and sometimes give commands and sometimes we exclaim things. Finally, then, we learned about premise and conclusion indicator words. Conclusion indicator words are words which indicate that here comes the conclusion of the argument. And they're words like therefore, thus, hence, so, it follows that, consequently, ergo, QED. And then there are premise indicator words, which are words which indicate that this is a piece of evidence towards a conclusion that will be stated. So because, since, on account of, given that, due to the fact that, insofar as, etc. And then the last little bit that I just mentioned is that you have to notice that when there's an argument, there's got to be an inference. It's not an argument just having 2 or 3 sentences. There has to be an implication from the premises to the conclusion. All right, guys, well, that's everything, I guess. That's the plan, and we got through it for today. So I'm going to let the stream close in a moment, but let me just say this. I'll be sending you the recorded lecture of today, later today or tomorrow morning at the latest. And I'll also provide you with the office hour link for Friday. Maybe I already sent you that one in the previous email. I can't remember. But if I did, you've got that link. And if I've forgotten and I haven't, then I'll make sure to mail it out before 11 a.m. tomorrow. So I have office hours from 11 to 12 on Fridays. And then our next actual lecture is Tuesday at the same time, 2:20 to 3:45. So you'll receive the link to that through the Canvas announcements. And then I'll see you back on Tuesday. Remember, we're only doing 2 weeks of this virtual stuff. And then we will be meeting in face-to-face starting the following week on Tuesday. So that's coming up, but we've got a couple of weeks to sort of get things moving before then. If you need anything at all, please email me and contact me or come to the office hour if you like, and I'll be happy to help with whatever it might be. But until then, I guess I'll close the stream. So let me see that you're ready to end the meeting. If you want to say goodbye, then I'll go ahead and end our Zoom meeting, and I'll see you guys soon.
Thank you, Dr.
Okay, thanks so much. Have a great
Bye.
weekend.
Bye.
Okay, take it easy. I'll see you soon. Bye. Thank you. Okay, see you guys soon. Thanks.